The game of the week in the Pac-12 is Washington and UCLA. They do battle tonight in Los Angeles down at the Rose Bowl. But what about the games coming this weekend? Lots of good action coming up in the Pac-12 slate in Week 4 and Week 2 of a full conference schedule. Let's go.
Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster. Thanks for making this your first listen or your first view of the day if you're watching on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your number one source to stay up to date with the Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe wherever you're listening to or watching the show so you can continue to stay up to date with our beloved Pac-12 as long as it exists, which... who knows? You just never know. The future remains uncertain. But what is certain is that today's episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Sign up on UnderdogFantasy.com with the promo code LOCKEDON and get your first deposit doubled up to $100. And I've got Carter Bahns with me again here on a Friday, senior editor and writer at BeaverBlitz.com. And Carter, let's just hop right into it because the fans and listeners of the show should know you by now. And I want to start with your Oregon State Beavers because they're on the road at Utah. I thought about putting this in the Pac-12 Prime Picks, which will be back in the final segment of today's show per usual here on a Friday. And I just kind of decided against it because, you know, I feel more confident in Utah going into this game. Oregon State, an emotional disappointment in a game they should have had against USC last week. Now they have to go on the road to a place where I don't see anybody winning this season, and that's Salt Lake City, where the Utes play host to a bevy of opponents and haven't lost in quite some time. How are you feeling for Oregon State going into this one?
Well, you opened the show saying that UCLA-Washington might be the Pac-12 game of the week, but I think it's close between that one and Oregon State-Utah. I mean, last week I said Oregon State-USC was probably the game of the week in the conference, and I look at this as a very similar matchup where you've got a hot Oregon State team, even coming off of a loss. I mean, this Beaver squad is still 3-1 and looks like it's ready to compete with just about everybody in the Pac-12 versus a highly ranked Pac-12 team in Utah, in a game that I think is, as far as, you know, the end of the season Pac-12 standings and the Pac-12 title race goes, I think this does have some implications there, particularly on Oregon State's end, where the Beavers have a loss under their belt now in conference play. And as you know, if you're going to get into that Pac-12 title game under this new structure, you're not going to be able to lose more than 1 or 2 games in conference play. So I think this, as far as Oregon State's concerned, in reaching its goal of getting to Las Vegas in December, I think this is probably close to a must-win for the Beavers.
Yeah, I'm with you that you can't have more than 2. I think you could have 2 Pac-12 losses if other things shape out the way that you would particularly or potentially need them to. And I feel that way even more strongly now than I would have, say, a few weeks ago, because the conference is looking really strong. And other than Oregon against Georgia and Florida knocking off Utah, the Pac-12 performed, I think, better than expected in the non-conference slate. And there are a lot of teams, Washington among them, who are clearly back and are a contender in the conference this year. Oregon State has taken a step forward from a season ago. Washington State has done the same. And you had ideas coming into this year that, yeah, the conference would be good. You'd have these teams, they'd be solid. But in my view, I think some of those programs look even better than I expected. Washington, of course, a couple jumps of where I thought they'd be in year one with their new coach. But looking at this game for Oregon State, Carter, Utah is just a tough team because they can defend. Kyle Whittingham's a defensive coach. They can run the football. They've got some weapons. They've got Cam Rising at quarterback, reigning first-team All-Pac-12 performer. If Oregon State's going to win this game, what do you think that looks like? How does the game play out that results with the Beavers coming back to Corvallis and getting that desired split against USC and Utah?
Very similar to last week and how we saw that play out with Oregon State falling by 3 to USC at home. I think the script for Oregon State in that game is very similar to the way that they would potentially beat a team like Utah, in that Oregon State's defense showed out against USC. I mean, that was a Trojans team that was averaging 50 plus points a game.
Yep.
550-ish yards per game, and the Beavers held them to 17 points and about 350 yards. So, I mean, I don't really think you can ask much more of that Oregon State defense, getting all sorts of pressure on Caleb Williams. Of course, they didn't bring him down very often, but who's going to against a Heisman caliber quarterback in Caleb Williams? And I think, rendering Jordan Addison relatively ineffective until that final drive, that's the kind of defensive game plan that the Beavers are going to need to take to Salt Lake City. Get to the quarterback, contain the pocket, don't let him beat you too much with his legs, and render those receivers ineffective. And I think that would be enough to take Utah's offense out of the game. And then at that point, it's just a matter of, can Oregon State hold on to the ball offensively? Because last week it was the 4 interceptions that cost the Beavers that game. And if Chance Nolan holds on to it a little bit better this week and the defense plays to the level that it did a week ago, I think Oregon State very well can, and in that case probably would, win this game.
Chance Nolan has improved in some respects from what he was as a quarterback a year ago, which was a solid quarterback that you can win games with. But you and I were talking here on the show coming into the season about how he needed to be more consistent, had to take care of the ball. He showed that through the first few weeks, and then the interception bug came at the worst time in a bad way against the Trojans last week, and he gives it up 4 times through the air. What did you see from him last week that caused him to be kind of the worst version of himself that up until that point we hadn't seen this season?
Well, frankly, I don't think all of it was on Chance Nolan's shoulders. I think a lot of it came down to the pocket protection too. We've talked ad nauseum about Oregon State's offensive line and how strong it is, how strong it was last year, and how we expected it to be about the same this year. For the most part, that has been the case, but USC got a decent amount of pressure on Nolan, and when you saw him throw the ball to the Trojans, it was oftentimes, he's avoiding pressure, he's trying to throw it away. He's under duress. One of them in particular, he was kind of thrown from his back foot and airmailed it a little bit, and that was because he had a couple of guys in his face. And so I think, while obviously Chance has to make better decisions and he has to execute those throws a little bit better, a lot of it did come down to the offensive line just not giving him a whole lot of time to work throughout the night. So again, Chance has to be better, but I think there was more to it than just his inability to put the ball on the money.
I think Utah is going to win, and I do think they'll cover. I don't feel strongly about it enough to put them in this week's edition of the Pac-12 Prime Picks, but that's where I would lean. The line sitting around 10.5, and that's not an indictment on Oregon State. I think that's just a case of Utah being a really good football team. I didn't think they'd lose at home all year coming into the season. I still feel that way after watching them through a few weeks. I think Oregon State hangs around in this one. I don't think it gets ugly, but I think you could see the Utes have a late touchdown or a field goal to win by somewhere in the 14 to 17 point range. But I expect the Beavers to make it interesting. I just think Utah is going to be able to last longer. And emotionally, I think the Utes are in a better place because the Beavs have to be sensing some sense of disappointment, right, with how that game played out, to fight that hard, to play that well, to give yourself that chance and to come up short, and to then have to go on the road and hear 50,000 plus screaming fans in your face every time something goes against your team. I think it's a really difficult spot to be in. So I like the Utes in this game to win and cover. How do you feel?
Yeah, that's got to be one of the most daunting home field advantages in the Pac-12, I think, with the student section. You're playing at elevation too. I think there's a lot of factors that go into that that makes Rice-Eccles such a difficult place to play. We actually saw that kind of at Reeser last week too. I mean, USC looked all out of sorts. There were miscommunications before the snap. The Trojans actually burned all 3 timeouts very early on, and took a delay of game in the second quarter because they ran out of timeouts. So we know how much home field advantage plays a role in these Pac-12 games. And I think for Oregon State to go to Salt Lake City, that's a very tough spot to try to bounce back from a disappointing loss, because like you said, it was emotionally draining, and the Beavers felt crushed after that game. I mean, they said that it stung, which you want it to. You want it to mean a lot to these guys, and it does. And for a guy like Brandon Kipper, who who took the microphone after the game. You could sense the passion in his voice, and he's one of those leaders that throughout the week has been telling his team, hey, we've got a big time opportunity this week to bounce back with a huge win that, probably not a whole lot of people are expecting to see us come out with. So I have heard throughout the week that the leadership on this team has really stepped up, and you have seen guys with level heads and saying, hey, we've got an opportunity to bounce back here.
Do you think the Bees can get it done?
I wouldn't predict it. But I wouldn't be entirely shocked if they did, just because, like I said, I mean, they laid the blueprint last week against USC. For all intents and purposes, they probably should have won that game. If Chance Nolan holds onto the ball a little bit better, the Beavers win that by a touchdown or more. So I think they have proven that they have what it takes, and that they know how to win games like this. And it's just a matter of executing it. And again, it's a very tough spot going on the road when you just lost like that. But I think they have enough to do it. I wouldn't predict it, but I think it'll be close.
I wouldn't be completely caught off guard if that happens, but I feel pretty confident in Utah going into this one, mostly because it's at home. I know Oregon State beat them last year, but that's all the more reason that I think I feel kind of confident in Utah is you have guys on that roster who remember, this is the one Pac-12 team that got us a year ago, and I think that sort of motivation will play into it as well. So I like the Utes there, and Oregon State's just got to fight their way through, keep the culture in a positive direction as they get into conference play, because they've got other tough games, but they've also got a lot of winnable games coming up once they get through Utah this week after USC a week ago, which is about as tough a stretch as you can have in the Pac-12, especially when you're at Utah. What about the rest of the games in the Pac-12? We'll get to all of those after. Reminding you, this episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to spice up the college football season. You can bet individual player props over passing yards, over rushing yards, under, over, whatever you want. You can find all sorts of amazing action for your team each week. It's easy to play. It's available in over 30 states. Just pick between 2 and 5 players across any team. Doesn't have to just be your team, and decide if they will finish higher or lower. It's one of the easiest fantasy to play games out there, and you can win cold hard cash in a single game. If you think Chance Nolan will be over a certain passing yard total, then you could bet that. You could bet him under. Cam Rising, Tavion Thomas, all these guys in the Pac-12, you can find them all at Underdog Fantasy. Sign up with the promo code Locked On, one word, and Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. You deposit $100, they give you $100 for free. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com or find the Underdog Fantasy app in the App Store or Google Play Store. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code Locked On, one word. Get in on the college football pick'em action today. So, Carter, later tonight, as this episode drops, Washington and UCLA are going to do battle in what will be, I think, the best game of the week, certainly the most important game of the week. And I talked on yesterday's show with Zach Anderson-Yoxheimer of Locked On UCLA Bruins about how I think it's more important for UCLA because they're in year 5. And Washington, they have high hopes for this season after the electrifying 4-0 start in which they have looked crisp every single week that they have taken the field under this staff. But to me, there's still a little bit more of an element of house money there for Kalen DeBoer and company, right? Where if Washington goes into Los Angeles and loses this game, no one's panicking or asking questions, right? It's just a minor road bump. If Chip Kelly and UCLA lose this game, you look around and go, these are the sort of ones you were hired to come in and be able to win. That's how I feel going into it. What about you?
Yeah, totally a make or break season for Chip Kelly, and I don't think we've been particularly inspired by what UCLA has done to this point. I mean, struggling against South Alabama and just narrowly pulling that out. I'm blanking on who they opened the season with, but it was another, lower division team.
Bowling Green.
Yes, Bowling Green. Thank you. They
were down. They were down in that game 7.
Yeah. They were down for quite a while, and so I think, you go into Pac-12 play with a team like that, and you say, well, I mean, what are the expectations at this point for UCLA and in what Dorian Thompson-Robinson's 20th season down there in LA? I mean, Chip Kelly's knocking on the door of getting fired if things go south. And this, it has the feeling of one of those games where if UCLA loses, I mean, they could lose that fan base if they haven't already. They could lose. They could lose the culture in that locker room if they lose a game like this, where I think, to your point, it is a game that you expect Chip Kelly to win, and a team with as much talent as the Bruins have to take care of business at home. That being said, I mean, is anyone going to be at the Rose Bowl to even watch this? I mean, UCLA is literally giving away free tickets. I saw their athletic director go on Twitter and post one of those, fake letters to your boss saying, "Hey, give so and so the day off so they can come to the Rose Bowl and watch this game." I mean, they're doing everything they can to get fans in that stadium, but nobody is supporting this team anymore. And to get some of that back, this is the kind of game you have to win.
They've had about 30,000, give or take a couple thousand through 3 games in the Rose Bowl this year. It is worth noting that they had, I mean, they're not going to fill it up. That's not something, not even USC has been filling up the Coliseum with Lincoln Riley there and all the hype and expectations and hope, frankly, that he's brought to the Trojans program since becoming their head coach. But UCLA last year had somewhere around like 60,000 in the stadium for the LSU game. I think if you can put up that sort of number, you feel better about it for UCLA, but it's still not going to be the most rabid environment. And I think that's an advantage for Washington because the Huskies have played 4 games in a row in the cozy confines of Husky Stadium, which, as you alluded to with Rice Eccles at Utah, one of the toughest venues, probably the most beautiful venue as well in the Pac-12. And now they have to go on the road for the first time. But it's not like they're going to Rice Eccles or to Pullman or to Autzen or even down to Reese or anything like that. They have, or heck, even Tempe can get crazy when ASU is actually good. They're not this year. Of course, everything is completely falling apart and they're looking for a new head coach. But it's one of the quieter road environments that you're going to be in, and I think that's a big thing for Washington. That you have to be at a hotel, wake up in a different place, change your routine, and that sort of stuff feels different. But for the actual game, I think it's noteworthy that they're not going to deal with necessarily the most hostile crowd that feels like they're right on top of you or anything like that, because it'll feel, even if they put 50 to 60,000 in there, it's not going to feel like more, right? Some of these stadiums, like Reser Stadium was what, 26,000 on Saturday. It looked and sounded like 70, but it's not going to be that way when Washington goes to the Rose Bowl. It's kind of the opposite.
And again, an opportunity for the Huskies, I think, to kind of prove that they're legit, because no matter what kind of environment you get on a road game, it's like you just said, it's still a road game. You're out of your routine, and you're not waking up in your own bed and everything. And these games are not easy to win, regardless of who you play on the road. That's why you see so many letdowns across the country. I mean, this isn't just a Pac-12 thing. You can go to the Big Ten and see teams go on the road and lay an egg against teams that you would expect them to beat. So Washington does enter this game as the betting favorite. It looks like the better team so far, but nothing's a given. But if the Huskies do come out with this with a win, I think it's impressive nonetheless, and obviously gives them it continues a solid start to Pac-12 play for them.
A question came in on the Huskies, and we'll spend just kind of a surface level amount of time reacting to this, because I think we could probably take up the rest of the show and maybe an entire other show talking about this. But David Harper asked via the YouTube comments, which is one of the 3 ways you can get a question answered here on the show, at Smalls_55 or at LO_Pac12 or the Twitter accounts. DMs are wide open, or hop in the YouTube comments. I monitor those daily. He said, obviously, with the COVID year, players get an extra year of eligibility. In regards to UW's quarterback situation, I actually don't know if English speaking wise, if that's supposed to be regards or regard. I just thought of that, but anyway, no one cares. In regard to their quarterback situation, Michael Penix is absolutely crushing it, true, but with his extra year of eligibility, do you see our highest ever quarterback recruit, Sam Heward, going to enter the transfer portal if Penix doesn't declare for the draft? It was a fascinating question, Carter, and it's a little bit of a postseason question, but the more Michael Penix looks really, really good, the more this question is probably going to loom as Husky fans think to the future, because I think there are 2 ways this could play out. Number one, Penix decides to come back and Heward does indeed enter the transfer portal, because it'll be his 3rd year not as the starting quarterback for the University of Washington, which is what he came there to do. Maybe he's patient enough. Maybe he's not. But the other thing to consider too is if Penix stays healthy for the first time in his career this season, which everybody would want to see. You never want to see a guy just battle injuries every time he steps on the field. But if he stays healthy this year and he keeps throwing the ball around the field like this and his 300 plus yards a game, one of the best statistically in the Pac-12 so far, he could very well declare for the draft. I don't think he'd be a high pick, but I see some of the guys who get picked up as backup quarterbacks in the league or signed to a practice squad deal. And if Penix keeps looking this way, yeah, you could put his name in that conversation, maybe be that sort of player.
It's a question that I think you and I kind of pondered a little bit in the preseason too, when we were looking at this Huskies team and saying, okay, well, what if Michael Penix does live up to what he did in that COVID year at Indiana? You know, what does that look like? And how do Dylan Morris, Sam Heward, et cetera, think the rest of their career might play out at Washington? And at the time I said, you know, if Michael Penix does put together a solid season, you know, maybe a Sam Heward thinks, all right, well, I'm not going to get an opportunity here in the near future. Let's go take the Jake Haener route and see what I can do at another school. And I think Jake Haener has kind of laid the blueprint for that at Washington. You know, we saw Dylan Morris. I think it was the Dylan Morris freshman season that pushed Haener to the portal, if I'm not mistaken. It could have been a year before that too, but no, it's interesting. And the point you make about him potentially leaving too, I think is, I think it's fitting because what Michael Penix has done so far, I mean, he's leading the Pac-12 in a couple of categories. He's right up there in the FBS ranks, I think, in passing yards or passing touchdowns. That is that's the kind of player you see declare for the draft a year early at that position. And so if he keeps that up, I think you see an opening at the quarterback position in Seattle next year. And so, you know, that becomes a little bit more alluring for Sam Heward to stick around. But it would take a dramatic drop off from Penix, I think, to lose this job this year. And yeah, if he just kind of, you know, if he just kind of lingers and, you know, he's just kind of an average quarterback, he probably holds on to that job. But then at the same time, he hasn't done enough for the NFL scouts to say, all right, yeah, we want to draft this guy. And at that point, you know, that's when you see Michael Penix come back. That's when these questions start to really loom. And you say, all right, well, is Sam Heward good enough to take that job from a quarterback who put together an average season? I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling here, but yeah, it goes to your point of, yeah, we could probably have a full half-hour conversation on this because it's not just limited to Washington. This is a college football wide dilemma that we are seeing in this new era with the transfer portal being wide open.
And it's not just with quarterbacks too. You can have this conversation at any position, which, you know, makes it interesting for guys like us. But I know that some fans grumble about that from time to time, and frankly, I can't blame them because oftentimes I feel that way too. I am a sports fan. I'm a college sports fan. I think everybody knows where my allegiances lie, and there are moments where guys enter the portal, and I go, darn, I wanted to see that guy, see what he had, but it's just the era that we're living in now. Let's go over to Washington State and Cal. And this will kind of transition into our Pac-12 prime picks to wrap up this Friday edition of the show as usual. But Cougars in a big spot here. I don't think this is as important of a game for Cal because generally speaking, expectations for the Golden Bears are low. They got a conference win, right? I mean, being 4-1 and beating Washington State, yeah, that put them in a really good spot, but I don't think it radically shifts their season. Washington State right now is trying to go out in Pullman this week and prove that they belong in that category of teams that are making the leap to, you know, maybe not necessarily be a Pac-12 contender, but could be one day perhaps. And you see it and you're like, boy, it looks like they're just not that far away. And if that's going to happen for Washington State, I think they've got to have this game against Cal at home.
This game's really going to test the psyche of the Cougars, I think. You know, after the way they lost to Oregon last week, the disappointment there, the absolute heartbreak and the letdown, can they get up to face an opponent like California that, you know, I think we all agree that Washington State's better than them, but it's not an inspiring opponent like Oregon is. And so when you're coming off of a defeat like that and, you know, you're emotionally wrecked after the way you lost that game, you know, how do you bounce back? It's very similar to looking at Oregon State going to Utah. You know, it's a bounce back spot for a team that lost a heartbreaking game. Washington State gets a much cushier opponent to do that against than Oregon State does. And I think that's kind of a double-edged sword because, Washington State, I would imagine Jake Dickert's going to get his team fired up to play anybody, but I think it's probably a little bit harder to do that against a Golden Bears team than Utah. I think Oregon State's fired up to go into Salt Lake City and prove something. But the Cougars, after losing a game like that, how excited are they to go out against a Golden Bears team? I don't know. I think it's kind of a mind game type of matchup.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you that when you had a chance to knock off a team that's been to 3 Pac-12 championships in the last 4 years or so, or the last I don't know, everything's all jumbled together and whatnot, but like everyone knows what Oregon has been in the Pac-12 conference, and you had them, you had them beat. Oregon fans had accepted defeat in that game, and then all of a sudden you look up and the defense allows a 4th down conversion, the defense allows a touchdown, offense goes 3 and out, allows another touchdown, and then you throw an interception, all in just a few minutes, and it was just you played 95% of a game that you need to win. But it was that last 5% ultimately that knocked Washington State off in that one and gave them their first loss of the year. But now they have a bounce back chance. Let's piggyback on that and go right into our Pac-12 prime picks. I guess my Pac-12 prime picks of the week. I'm hoping to keep things rolling here, Carter. 3 picks every week, 3 straight winning weeks after the disastrous 0-3 beginning, but a 3-0 after that, couple of 2-1 showings, and Oregon very nearly had the backdoor cover. They were 2 seconds away from a backdoor cover there, but nevertheless, it's another winning week, and my favorite pick of the week. I think I was going to pick this up until it was around, even if it got to like 7 or 8. I think anything under 10, I would have taken Washington State, just like we were talking about. I think Jake Dickert, early in his tenure, is going to be testing his guys all week in practice and say, we gave that game away, but we showed that we are good enough to play with that team over there that has been to several Pac-12 championships in the last few years. We're good enough to do that. Let's go out and show it this week. I'm only giving up 4, taking the Cougars here at home in Pullman. So back-to-back games that they get to play in front of their home fans. I think the Golden Bears offense is going to be in for a rude awakening after popping last week, led by a stud running back, the freshman Jaden Ott, who went for 274 yards. That was against Arizona. And this Washington State defense is much, much different. They make plays, they cause havoc, and I think this is going to be a game that Washington State wins something like 27-10.
Yeah, I think we can look at what California did last week and be impressed, but you do have to remember that Arizona, while it is a lot better than it was last year, and I think it's, even last year was better than its 1-11 record.
Agree.
Its defense is still very suspect, and really, I mean, that whole team has so much to build before it's at the caliber that we can expect it to take care of business against California. California is still the better team there, so it's not going to be easy for Washington State, is what I'm saying. Cal is still a solid team, but with the way Washington State has opened the year, and with the fact that they probably should have beat Oregon, if not for a final 5-minute collapse or whatever it was there in that game, I think we'd be talking about the Cougs as a double-digit favorite here if they had pulled that thing off.
Yeah, I like a -4, and Cam Ward had his best game as an FBS quarterback. That transition that coming into the year I thought might take a little bit of time. It did, and they didn't need him to carry him on the road in that big upset win against Wisconsin. But still, we were asking the question, like, well, is Cam Ward going to look, a little more comfortable, a little more fluid within the offense? And then he was, up until the game sealing interception there on a screen pass that is, only got one option, and he just didn't see the defensive end dropping. I'm not going to penalize him in a massive way for that. The other interception, the defensive back wrestled away from the wide receiver. Not concerned there either. He made a lot of really good throws and great plays with his legs in that game to extend it. And I think Cal will have a tough time tackling him because everybody will. So Washington State -4, that's my first pick. Then it gets interesting. Let's go to the other one where I like a favorite, and then I'll finally close with an underdog. USC at home against Arizona State. It's a big line, Carter. It's a big line, but I'm taking the Trojans here, -20 5. I think this could be 48-17. I mean, Arizona State might not even score that much. They're probably going to turn the ball over against Trojans defense. I think the Trojans could absolutely, at home, I wouldn't take this number on the road, but at home, I think they can blow the doors off ASU that's fledgling.
Last week I said I wouldn't touch the Sun Devils line with a 25,000-foot pole just because it's week 1 under an interim coach and you have no idea what you're going to get. I mean, that team could go and upset Utah, or it could go lose by 50, and ultimately it did kind of get the doors blown off of it. So we're past that. Now we're into the part of the season under an interim coach where I'm comfortable fading Arizona State, regardless of what the number is, regardless of the team they're playing, because this program is, if it's not in shambles now, it could be in shambles within the next couple of weeks. So I like USC to cover this thing, and it could get out of hand very early, and I don't think the Sun Devils are going to put up a fight at all.
Plus, USC, after their offensive struggles in Corvallis last week, going to be extra motivated to put up another big number, catch everybody's attention, and score a bunch of points. And think about it like this. ASU lost at home to Utah last week, 34-13. So that's a 21-point margin in Tempe. Can USC be 5 points better than Utah at home? I think the answer there is yes against this Arizona State team. And then lastly, I will preface this by saying, for anyone who's trying to ride the hot streak potentially and get in on the action here, and you should check out Bet Online for all of these lines and anything else that you need. Our sponsor here at the Locked On Podcast Network. This is not necessarily a football bet because Colorado has done nothing to inspire through 4 games, as we've talked about. But Carter, they have been a 2-touchdown or greater underdog in 4 straight weeks to begin the season. And they are 0-4 in their record. They're 0-4 against the spread. They're 17.5-point underdogs in Tucson against Arizona, who's got a superior offense, but whose defense, which struggled against a mediocre Cal offense a week ago mightily, can still be suspect at times. I cannot see, if Colorado can't cover 17.5 against that Arizona team, which is much improved, but still a year away from being really good, then we have to talk about them as one of the worst Pac-12 teams in the history of the conference, quite literally. And so I'm just taking it from a numbers perspective here. 17.5, again over 2 touchdowns. I've got the half-point hook, or else I might have taken Stanford plus 17.5, but I don't have it there. I've got it here, and I'm putting the Buffs in the Pac-12 prime picks again.
I like it. It's a precedent play rather than this team's probably not 17.5 points worse than Arizona type play. And I think it's apt because, I mean, like you said, if Colorado really is 2 touchdowns and a field goal worse than Arizona, I mean, that's
still a cover. That's 2 touchdowns and a field goal. That's still a cover. You go out there, give me 34-17. That's a cover.
Yeah. Yeah. But if that is the case, I mean, I think we're talking about Colorado as potentially the worst team in college football at that point. Because, I mean, if it can't cover a spread that large against an Arizona team that, reminder, won 1 game last year and still has so much work to do. We were talking about Arizona last year as being one of the worst teams in college football. And if Colorado is really that much worse than that team a year later, the Buffs are probably not winning a game this year.
And nobody wants to see that. No. Teams have down years, but no one deserves to be 0-12 at the Power 5 level. Carter Bahns, senior editor and writer at beaverblitz.com. Nobody wants to go through a week where you don't come on the show, my friend. I certainly don't want to live in that sort of world, so I appreciate you taking the time as always.
Absolutely.
I appreciate everyone listening. Enjoy the football this weekend. I will see you next time. And as always, have a wonderful rest of your day.